Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Lincoln Journal Star's Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin, joined by Wilson Moore, as usual. We got a lot to talk about, Wilson. We took a little bit of a week off. Sorry to anybody who missed us, but you were down in Oklahoma. We had a lot going on. There's football updates, baseball updates, and of course, we want to talk about softball's NCAA tournament run, but we'll get to all that in a minute. You all right? You survived a trip down to Oklahoma?
I did, yeah. First time ever in Oklahoma. Saw the bustling metropolis of Stillwater. Covered some softball. Pretty eventful weekend. I think a more eventful weekend than certainly I was expecting going into that for Nebraska softball.
Definitely some dusty roads on the way down
absolutely.
there. Absolutely.
Winding through Kansas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, a lot of people complain about I-80 west through western Nebraska, but ultimately I think you're getting those desolate highways no matter what direction you leave. Nebraska.
There are more hills in Nebraska. Yeah. I noticed Nebraska, you at least get some up and down. It's just flat going through Kansas.
Absolutely. So you survived, you saw the tournament, and we'll break that down in a minute, but I want to start with football like we usually do. Some big news. Quarterback Dylan Raiola, of course, a pursuit that's lasted months, years even, dating back to his first trip to Nebraska a few years ago, was there at the Friday Night Lights camps. He's been back with his family, with his brother, with his dad. Well, finally, we have a second decision after the Ohio State commit a few years ago, but officially Dylan Raiola committed to Georgia over Nebraska, ending a long pursuit. And it's kind of tough because they go after this guy for months, for years, and ultimately it doesn't lead anywhere. But it's pretty easy to understand why the nation's number one recruit would want to go to Georgia.
Oh, absolutely. It's just, I think, if you just look at it from an objective perspective, removing Dylan Raiola's connections to Nebraska, it's hard to imagine a top prospect picking Nebraska over Georgia. With that said, obviously there were the connections, and I think that's what makes it just, a little disappointing for Nebraska, just in the sense of this was a prospect who you could speed up the timeline of what Matt Rule is trying to do. You come in with a new coach, something of a rebuild at that point. Dylan Raiola was the kind of guy who can make that move that forward a little more quickly than it might have otherwise.
Yeah, and that's part of what the recruiting pitch was, I'm sure, too. Like, it's to Raiola, Nebraska be saying, hey, you come here, you win, and you're going to go down in history. Like, obviously, his family's already gone down in history, but to continue that legacy and to be that quarterback that, Rule wants to bring Nebraska to that next step, that's probably what they pitched him on. But if you think about what Georgia pitches him on, it's, hey, you're going to make it to the NFL. You're going to get the chance to win national championships. So very different situations, different circumstances for him, when he's making that decision. But easy to see why they would go after him. Like, even if it's going to be a long shot for Nebraska, like, if you're talking about the nation's number one recruit, you got to go after that guy with everything you've got. And ultimately, I think the interesting thing is it kind of put a damper on their other 2024 quarterback options. And you saw it was a wait and see. They were waiting for Raiola for quite a few months. And ultimately, WS quarterback Daniel Kaelin, who Nebraska was very high on, ended up committing to Missouri a couple months ago. And you think, okay, they've lost out on him. They've kind of made their choice to pursue Raiola. Well, everything kind of flipped on its head this week. You get kind of the dominoes that happen there, which I'll be interested to see quickly what happens at Georgia, because they got another 2024 quarterback commit too. So we'll see what happens with the Bulldogs. But anyway, the big news, Daniel Kaelin flipping from Missouri to Nebraska. Really good for Nebraska to get that 2024 quarterback out of the way, because didn't sign a high school guy in 23. Richard Torres is gone. They need an up-and-coming guy to come through this program.
Yeah, and Kaelin is, he's not the number one recruit in the nation, but that's not a bad consolation prize after missing out on Raiola. Like you said, homegrown guy, had a lot of interest. And yeah, I think, like you said, it didn't take long for the dominoes to fall back in place. It certainly made sense. You can see how one thing led to another with his commitment, no more than a couple days after Raiola committed to Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those things too where Kaelin, I mean, his offer came from the previous staff when Scott Frost was the head coach, and when the quarterbacks coach, he's been through a couple of different quarterbacks coaches as well. And that relationship, I think, it kind of stayed up. There was always that interest, I think, between Kaelin and Nebraska. But I think it's interesting to see it from his perspective too, like, because there are some players that you'd have to think that, ultimately, if you are that second option to Raiola, there's some guys I think that would be like, hey, that's disrespectful. Like, you got to be all in on me. But I think he kind of has that emotional intelligence to kind of realize like what Nebraska's perspective was. And I think for him too, just doing what's best for himself, that's what you want from all the athletes, making their college decisions. So staying home, having that opportunity, I think clearly he identified that as, hey, this outside stuff, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that he wanted to be a Husker. So
yeah, and leaving Missouri, that's a team with a bit more of a glut of quarterbacks than Nebraska. I think his path to playing time there would be a little tougher to navigate than at Nebraska. They've got Sam Horn as a guy they're really high on going into his sophomore year this year. They think he's the real deal. So I think he has Kaelin has a bit more of a path toward playing time. You can see it a little better at Nebraska than Missouri.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because like I mentioned, the lack of the younger quarterbacks. Well, they got Jeff Sims, who has 2 years left, Chuba Purdy, Heinrich Harburg. These guys are both juniors too. They've used up a couple years of eligibility. So you're expecting that they're going to have some of that path to playing time down the road. And in particular, just from what I've seen from Kaelin, it's kind of an interesting one because you kind of have this concept of Sims as mobile, agile guy who can get out there and run. And Kaelin has a little bit of that, but I think he's a lot more of a pocket passer type, which you might be like, well, shouldn't they recruit a quarterback who's going to be able to do all these different aspects of the offense? But ultimately, rules set a lot of times they're going to be able to tailor the offense to the quarterback's needs. And from what I see from Kaelin, just watching him at Bellevue West a little bit, I mean, he's an excellent passer, very accurate, strong arm, reads the offense very well. And the spread style offense that Bell West plays, I mean, he threw to 2 top 150, national recruits at wide receiver last year. They've got great linemen, a great system, great overall team talent. So I think that's prepared him a lot right away. He's been playing in this system. And something interesting about Kaelin too is I believe it was two or 3 years ago, Bellevue West had a quarterback, Luke Johansson, who was very good, very solid, talented quarterback. Kaelin, just an up-and-coming freshman, sophomore. The Bellevue West coaching staff liked him so much that they take out the regular starting quarterback in Johansson, get Kaelin in there for a couple of drives because they knew this kid was going to be special. They needed to get him some varsity snaps early in his career. That's really paid off. And I think he's, like I said, I mean, he's an intelligent player. I'm really impressed with what I've seen from him so far, and joins that 2024 recruiting class, a big one, getting that quarterback out of the way. So finally, all that Dylan Raiola stress, it's gone. Stress about Daniel Kaelin, while he's here, he's committed, and that's the update on on the quarterback situation as things stand. But another addition too, actually, I was kind of expecting things to slow down a little bit, but it never ends. Transfer portal visitors, there's always stuff going on in the portal, and these off-season departures opened up 2 scholarships for walk-on guys that were granted, and evidently another scholarship that was able to go to a transfer portal player. Utah offensive lineman Tyler Knack just announced he's transferring to Nebraska. Redshirted as a freshman out there at Utah, 4 years of eligibility left, and really a big one because we've talked a couple times about offensive line depth, and especially at tackle. It's kind of a thing where they've been moving guys out there, training them at tackle just to see what happens, particularly left tackle Teddy Prohaska. He's been a starter for 2 years, but he's missed over half the season both of those times. So really big addition, I think, for the depth of that offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely. We heard a lot, especially in the spring, about this much maligned offensive line. And this is a solid depth pickup, a guy who was recruited, a Power 5 recruit in high school. And, this is the kind of thing that happens a lot these days, especially in the transfer portal era. He didn't get playing time at Utah, redshirted. Now he's coming somewhere where he can be, I think it looks like at least, a rotational depth piece on the O line.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of guy that you want to target, to somebody that, hey, he's been able to, maybe go through a year of the conditioning program, learn what it is about college football, but he's still got all 4 years left. So that potential is out there. And I think another key note there, I'm not sure exactly, how much of a factor offensive line coach Donovan Raiola played in maybe Knack's recruitment originally. Wasn't sure, how much he targeted him there, but Raiola has really strong connections in Utah, by the way, the Pacific Northwest, all those states up there. He's kind of the main guy recruiting those states for Nebraska, and he makes his rounds talking to coaches, looking at linemen. So I have to imagine that Raiola's connections in Utah helped pay out and get Knack here to Nebraska, by the way. So joining the team as a transfer. One other football note to share: there's a big report from ESPN earlier this week about the Big Ten as a whole, not just Nebraska, talking about the TV deal. Of course, we heard this CBS, NBC, Fox, this huge deal. That's why you get USC and UCLA coming to the Big Ten. I mean, this has been a big, big deal for the conference, something that former Commissioner Kevin Warren, this was going to be kind of his, his legacy there in the Big Ten. Well, the ESPN report comes out and it says that the TV deal isn't even finished. That the Big Ten is scrambling to finish this thing before it kicks into action this fall, which, obviously there's a lot of details. I mean, this is complicated stuff, but you'd think that stuff would be done, right?
Yeah, I can't claim to be an expert on this kind of thing, but I would think they would have the TV deal done more than 3 months ahead of time. But yeah, weird time in college athletics.
Absolutely. So, by the way, the new Big Ten commissioner, Tony Petitti, kind of stressful for him, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you get a new gig and you got to finish some multi-million-dollar contract. And so Nebraska athletic director Trev Alberts, he kind of briefly addressed this on his monthly radio show, and he was just kind of supportive of Petitti, said he's going to iron out those details, and really important for him to do so because the TV deal, by the way, I mean, having those exclusive windows for the Big Ten, getting onto CBS, having those night games on NBC, the exposure for the Big Ten, I mean, is part of their long-term goal, to be one of those dominant conferences, seemingly alongside the SEC that we've seen. But one of the key details from that ESPN report was that Michigan, Penn State, Ohio State, not really on board with the idea of playing these November night games, which kind of goes down to the Big Ten tradition. They didn't even have night games at Michigan or whatever for decades. Decades. It hasn't even been that long. So you kind of understand the cold climate. You don't want to put your team through that, but at the same time, I mean, this is a big deal for the Big Ten. It's like, you're really going to let a couple teams, derail the thing for the rest of the conference? We'll see. We'll see. Again, out of our hands. We're just spitballing on it. TV deals and whatnot. We're just here to talk about sports. So let's get on to the softball tournament. Nebraska softball made the NCAA tournament. Pretty tough regional, I think, overall there in Stillwater, Oklahoma. A really good softball state, Sooners and the Cowboys, Oklahoma State. Both of them really, really good, really strong programs. And it was a pretty emotional, pretty crazy first couple of days of the regional for Nebraska, right?
Yes, it was. You really saw both ends of the spectrum in those first 2 days there. At first, Friday night, 5-0 lead late in the game, just kind of a defensive meltdown at the end, puts them in a really tough position because at that point they need to go 4-0 to make it out of there. Lost to a very good Wichita State team who had beaten them twice in the regular season. Followed that up Saturday afternoon, beats a just happy to be there UMBC team that went 2-out. And that set up Saturday night, one of the I'm not going to say probably, the craziest game of the regional. Nebraska was down 3 runs with 2 outs in the 7th inning and a runner on first. All Wichita State needed to do was get 1 out before allowing 5 consecutive hits. Couldn't do it. Game goes into extra innings. Maya Felder ties it up. Wichita State picks up 2 in the 8th. Nebraska comes back again, walks it off with Caitlin Kaneda's fielder's choice. Wild game, and just a game that I think you can make the case made the regional successful.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
this Ronda Revelle said as much. We after she said we advanced a game further than we did last year, and that's progress. And so big win against a really good Wichita State team. Lost to Oklahoma State the next day. Nebraska was just running on fumes at that point between an extra inning game, having to play an extra game because they lost. They had played 23 innings going into that game. Two pitchers pitched all 23 of those innings. Their opponent, Oklahoma State, had played 13 because they run ruled the team and had three pitchers pitching those 13 innings. So just a much more fatigued Nebraska team. Courtney Wallace pitching her 222nd inning of the year. It was just a team, even putting aside how good Oklahoma State was, Nebraska was just out of gas by that point, I think, even if they didn't want to admit it. And still came close. Actually had a lead in the seventh. Oklahoma State had a lot of hard contact. Could have been a very different game before they finally took the lead, but end up losing 5-2, closing the book on just a strange Nebraska softball season. It's a season that, depending on your perspective, could have been a lot better or a lot worse. A lot of close games, some of which they won, some big wins, tough losses, and now they go into the off season, having made the NCAA tournament in consecutive seasons for the first time since 2016. So something to build off there.
Yeah, big credit to head coach Ronda Revelle, her program, making those two NCAA tournaments. And probably that Wichita State comeback, that's the highlight of the season. Like if you're thinking about players on the team, like memories that are made, that stuff is what they're going to come back and remember, 5-10 years. Hey, remember when we came back in that NCAA tournament game? So yeah, credit to them. That was incredible to watch. And a late night for you at the ballpark for a couple of those, right?
Two straight late nights. Yeah. That's the thing that, you said the highlight of the season, it came 24 hours after the low light of the season, blowing a 5-run lead in the late innings of a tournament game. Just, you really saw the duality of sports there, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat in one 24-hour span. Yeah,
no kidding. And if you just think, like you talked a little bit of a big picture thing too about the season as a whole. Well, how disappointed they would have been, and if they'd gone 0-2 in the tournament. Well, they win 2, and I think you can leave with your heads held high. Losing that final game to Oklahoma State for all the reasons that you said, and that can obviously be a tough one for the seniors. Wrapping up their career. Maya Felder and Courtney Wallace are the two that really stand out from this year's group, but seem to be in high spirits despite the season coming to an end there.
Yeah. I think it was a very reflective tone after that last game. Able to talk to both of them. Both are sticking around Nebraska. Maya is working on her PhD. She has quite a bit of academia ahead of her. Courtney has another year of grad school. But it's interesting because those are the only two seniors leaving. And so it makes for an interesting dynamic in that Nebraska will bring back most of the same team, but the two they lost were pretty major contributors. Courtney Wallace pitched more innings this season than any Husker has in a season since 2013. They only have 2 holes to fill, but they are big holes.
Definitely. The Iron Woman there in the pitching circle. Courtney Wallace, she will be missed. Both, by the way, really great teammates. Their teammates always held them in high esteem. So
both captains.
Yeah. Leadership, pitching. These are the things that Ronda Revelle will have going through her mind the next couple months. So yeah, like I said, Wilson was there. He'll be sticking at it, seeing if we have any softball updates to come. But want to touch in on baseball as well. They're currently in the midst of the Big Ten tournament. Always softball a couple weeks ahead in the calendar. But both these sports, into postseason play. And just a quick recap on where we were. Nebraska baseball swept Penn State, took 2 of 3 from Purdue in the next series. So entering the tournament hot, having won 6 of their last 7. Those are both really good programs, by the way, as well. So what Nebraska's walking into, though, is a situation where most of the teams in the field, them included, they need to win it to make the NCAA tournament. So it's really, pressure situation for them. In particular, there are a couple teams there that kind of lead the field: Indiana, Iowa, and Maryland. And those are the three that you're already looking at being in the NCAA tournament field. So pressure's off for them a little bit. I think, they still might need a win or two just to kind of secure their seeding. But those three teams all kind of had the regular season to do what they needed to do. And the interesting thing, as we record this, the opening round, a few of the opening round games have already been completed. And Iowa had a pretty easy one, 13-3 win over Michigan, but not easy for those other two teams that really excelled there in the regular season. Indiana beat Illinois 4-3, and Maryland only 3-2 over a Michigan State team that, sorry, Spartans, but I Michigan State really did not impress me during the regular season. So seeing them play Maryland, who I think is an excellent hitting team, so close, pitching matchups probably played in a little bit, but still, I think really you look at the Friday night starters that these teams have, and that kind of levels the playing field for these opening round matchups. So I think we saw that a little bit in that one. And so Nebraska, the last opening round game, starting today, Wednesday, as we record this, they will be playing Rutgers. Nebraska, the number 4 seed in the tournament, Rutgers number 5. And it will be usual Friday starter for Nebraska, left-hander Emmett Olson, Maryland awaiting the winner in that one. So really important. I think, this kind of goes without saying for double elimination, but you really just have to win that first one. Can't fall in the loser's bracket.
Especially with your Friday starter on the mound.
And in particular, I think it's so important for Nebraska too, because the bullpen's been really inconsistent this year. Like, you can trust them in certain moments, but the more you trot them out there, the more risk you have that things kind of spiral out of control, or that you burn your best arms, and you might need them later in the tournament. So that's kind of the calculus there as Nebraska starts things off. And like I said, I think they need to go all the way. I mean, getting as far as possible, in the tournament, maybe being one of those last 3 teams left standing, that's a successful tournament. But you look at some of the players that they have, and you want them to be playing in June. You look at, in particular, we had some of the Big Ten all-conference teams came out, and Nebraska has 2 first-team selections, second baseman Max Anderson and shortstop Bryce Matthews. These guys have been hitting home runs all year. They're both hitting at a really high mark. Anderson hitting .412, which is the best in the entire Big Ten. Really incredible, by the way. Both of them 20-plus home runs. Like, these are guys that these seasons, I mean, they stand out any conference, any team in the nation. So we'll see what they can do in the tournament, because Nebraska needs them more than ever in this moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's a testament to how jam-packed the Big Ten is, that Nebraska is the 4 seed in the tournament and basically needs to run the table to win. I think that speaks really to the chasm between those 3 teams you mentioned earlier and just everyone else there in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's a good year in general for the Big Ten, because I think most years they're kind of around 2 bids, like maybe they can sneak in a third, but to have 3 solid teams, it means the competition has been good this year. And by the way, if you make that point, if you look at the RPIs, I think those 3 tournament teams are they're in the 30 to 40 range. Nebraska's down at 90 to 100, and pretty much so is the rest of the Big Ten. So spot on with that one. And by the way, the other 2 all-conference picks, outfielder Gabe Swanson was a second-team pick. He's hit a lot of home runs this year, been a good bat in the outfield. And Nebraska closer Shea Shanneman, also a third-team selection. He's had some big outings. He's gone, 3-4 scoreless innings at times to earn and save. And if Nebraska's going to go far in this tournament, they'll need Shanneman for some big innings down the road. So that's your Big Ten tournament preview. We'll have Evan Bland, our colleague from the World Herald. He'll be pretty much setting up shop there, but stay tuned to journalstar.com. We will have Big Ten tournament coverage for you. And just a quick note as we close this one out, want to shout out the Nebraska track and field team, sending 56, that's a lot, different entries to the first round, first regional of the NCAA postseason out there in the West Division. It's a 4-day regional meet. 29 different Nebraska men, 27 from the women's team out there. The most bids for this regional meet since 2010. So Justin St. Clair, the first-year permanent head coach, doing a great job. We will see how many of those make it all the way to the outdoor nationals. But a lot of great opportunities. They've got a lot of great throwers. So again, we'll have the updates for you there at journalstar.com, seeing how those track and field athletes get on this weekend. But we got a little bit of a lighter week. There's going to be a lot of recruiting
down a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of recruiting going on in June, but softball now wrapping up. Like you said, track and field, baseball, those last two spring sports. I think tennis is finishing up as well. So stuff going on. We will have another Life in the Red for you next week, wrapping up the Big Ten tournament. Again, looking ahead to a busy June there in football recruiting. But I think that's all the updates we've got for you today. Once again, appreciate all of your support, all of you regular listeners and viewers. So this will do it for today's Life in the Red. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.